Wow. Oh. Well, that happened.
You're onto something there.
All right, continue. I'm going to clean. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about a quantitative retrospective. What might that look like?
So it is an opportunity to dive into the data. I would say there's two halves to every retrospective, and pretty much any conversation.
Or anything, really. There's two halves in everything.
Every whole.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
You've got the feelings, which is qualitative, and you've got the numbers, which are the quantitative.
Okay.
A lot of our work is really hard to make quantitative, or just look at it through a quantitative lens because...
And when you say our work, you're talking about the work of...
Anything to do with technology at this point, which is weird because you think computers,
yeah.
Ones and zeros, it ought to be all be numbers. But there's people involved, so that automatically makes it really tough to get any real quantitative data.
Yeah. I'm just thinking in the back of my head, there might be somebody who's manufacturing refrigerators or something that's curious about the retrospective. We're looking at the specific implications of technology work here.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, not even necessarily specific just to software development or application development. I would say anyone working in a technology-based team at this point.
Okay.
So yeah, I think quantitative is probably the easiest to abuse as well, because as soon as you put a chart or a graph or a metric in front of someone, they think they have the story.
Yeah.
And really, you're seeing 1 or 2% of the story.
Okay. So you're going to do a quantitative retrospective. We like to name our retrospectives. Like, we got the sailboat, we got the starfish. That's 99.99% of all retrospectives, except for the rote retrospectives that are like, give me your list. So what does a quantitative retrospective look like? That sounds like something that wouldn't necessarily fit the mold of these models that we have.
Yeah, I think those models you can classify them even more specifically and say that they're formats. They're formats of exercises that you lead the team through.
So would you say that there are some familiar retrospective formats?
Absolutely.
That lend themselves to that intent of getting some quantitative understanding?
Probably not as well known as like the what went well, what didn't go well, or sales and anchors kind of formats. Because I think it's really contextual based on your team and the instrumentation that you have in place.
Okay.
So when you first start talking about metrics, a lot of people go into their management tool, be it Jira, Azure DevOps, Rally, whatever it is, and they look at the generated charts out of that. That's your velocity chart, your sprint report, your cycle time, your cumulative flow diagram. Those are great, and they're an awesome place to start with a team, and your team totally should look at those things. But I don't want the list to end there. You should have some metrics coming out of the thing that you're building. If you're building infrastructure, it'd be nice to know how often your infrastructure goes down. That would be a great metric to have that you could then retrospect on.
Like feature uptake.
Yeah, how many people are viewing your web page? How many pull requests does your branch have? All of these things are opportunities to ask questions. And that really is the format, in my mind, for a quantitative retro, is to put the metric in front of the team, explain what it is measuring, and then let the team ingest it and start making observations from it. So explain the team, this is your cumulative flow diagram, or this is your control chart. This is what it's measuring, this is how we get to these numbers. And don't tell them whether it's good or bad. They're smart, grown-ups, they can figure it out. Because the real question is, it's not should this number be bigger or smaller, it's this is what the number is right now. What do we want this number to look like instead? And that is how we get to the action items out of a quantitative retro.
And I want the team to tell me the story. I want to give you the metrics, but I want you to tell me the story behind it, because it's not always what it looks like. To your point
it's almost
earlier.
never. Yeah.
Right. So when I see a team, let's just take velocity, for example. They're looking at their velocity and they're like, oh, we planned 20 points and we completed 20 points. Well, we're an awesome team. But what happens when those 20 points they completed were not the 20 they committed to? Now that metric really is not telling the story that you thought it was.
I want as many metrics as I possibly can.
But what I'm getting at is you're making it in traditional retrospective formats. You're making it easier. You're just like, it's these categories. Here's a sticky pad. Just say things based on those categories. Are we still doing that in a quantitative retro?
You might. I see them to be most beneficial when it's very conversational.
Okay.
This is not quiet time and go put your stickies up on the wall and then we'll all go look at them later. This is, what is this metric speaking to you at the moment? This is our cycle time. What do y'all think of that?
It's interesting. You could do this with anything. You could look at revenue numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You could look at the vacation days taken, and use that as the framework for a conversation.
And this is why it's scary, because you start making inferences. As soon as you see a number, you start to assume why that number is the way that it is. And this is why I think they're also the easiest to abuse, is because just someone using the tool the wrong way. Jira is a perfect example of this. If you move all of your stories out of your sprint into the next sprint before your current sprint ends, your velocity drops to 0. You did it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're actually carrying over 400 points.
Yeah.
So just looking at the metric will never give you the story.
Yeah.
You've got to question it, and you've got to have enough that you can actually paint some level of accuracy going along with them. Because positive intent,
right.
People use tools incorrectly, or maybe it's set up incorrectly and measuring the wrong thing. Negative intent, it's super easy to game. It's super easy to sandbag, and you're only as useful as the data is accurate.
Well, sometimes it's just a matter of you didn't know what the effect would be of the thing you did inside the tool,
Mm-hmm.
right? Someone says like, oh, I didn't realize that when I did that, it was going to change our metric.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad we're looking at it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is why we use the tooling to establish the narrative, because the narrative is as close to reality as we can get. Whether it's about a sprint or your tech stack or anything else, you're trying to establish what happened in the last 2 weeks. If we're looking at a sprint, we're trying to build the narrative of what happened. And you can get insight into that narrative through your metrics, but they never, I'm just going to keep saying this over and over again, they are not the real story. They can give you different lenses to look at the narrative through.
So it's a matter of looking at the numbers and then trying to find the honesty
Absolutely.
buried inside there.